The Cargo, a short story by Maximilian Alexander Paulin. Part 1. New technology is not good or evil in and of itself. It's all about how you choose to use it. David Wong. It is the framework which changes with each new technology, not just the picture within the frame. Marshall McLuhan. In a world of global competition and new technologies, I think competition is coming from new places. Charles L. Evans. Any new technology, if it's used by evil people, bad things can happen. But that's more of a question of politics of the technology. Geoffrey Hinton. The rivets speckled the pipes and tubes that ran the length of the corridor. Each cluster of rivets were an exact meter from the next cluster. The pipes running, all this way and that, in groups from one bulkhead to another, dipping behind circuit boards and light panels, then emerging from the other side, still unified with their corresponding brethren. The panels that lit all were spaced every 2.5 meters and ran the entire length of the upper deck. The light spit forth from these panels gave a splicing effect to any solid object that blocked their path to the opposite wall. So, as Pock moved through the corridors, his shadow shuffled around him like a fan, with each blade starting at his front and, having moved the semi-circumference around him, dissipated at his rear. The bulkhead, all cool steel with white brackets, loomed ahead of him. The freighter, Separate Progendum, was made up of 2 full-length corridors, one on top and one below, a double cargo hold, the engine room, within which the fusion reactor bay was tucked tightly into the rear, the bridge and corresponding UNISAM operational system, a mess hall that could seat 12 people, 8 maintenance hatches that led to 4 separate maintenance tunnels, the cryopod chambers, which housed 4 pods, 2 active and 2 inactive, and the lavatories, which lay adjacent to the cryopod chambers, across from the mess hall. Jim Pock, Engineer 762-8, he announced as he finally reached the vocalized passcode console outside Bulkhead 2A. The door spat out a biometric scanner and quickly recalled after a few whirs, and the brackets released. As the door opened, a flood of cigar smoke and boisterous conversation accosted Pock's senses. The room was filled with hit reps and ex-gen science officers for the pre-flight check. They were all gathered in small groups of 2 and 3 that now dotted the airlock reception and cargo bay. In the center of the reception stood a group of 3, 2 from ex-gen, a young fuzzy man in blue and white, and a tall blonde woman, his superior, in green and white, as well as a portly hit rep with wild brown hair that swirled in the front. "Jim, how's the pre-flight check going?" the heavyset hit representative announced as Pock entered the docking area. The company's reps always did that, called you by your first name, with all the intent pressed upon sounding intimate, but often enough, read with the same inflection as a pre-flight checklist. Without waiting for an answer, "We're just loading the last of the cargo. The Progendum will be ready to separate from Lunar 1 within the hour." "Fine. I have one more pass to make down below, then we can prepare for separation. Has anyone seen Burke?" Damian Burke was to be the second engineer on a 3-flight haul to Sag-Deg on the other side of the Milky Way. They had 2 drops in that quadrant, then they would begin their return journey and be back before 2116. "He's in the cargo bay doing the count and running route corroborations before departure," answered the hit rep, who returned to his conversation with the 2 employees from Intergalactic Freighters, the company for whom Jim Pock worked. Pock had taken up with IGF back when X-Gen had announced their need for freighters to make it to the extragalactic installations. This was his first intergalactic run, and, if he was lucky, it was one of only 7 he would complete in order to offer him the opportunity to retire by 38. It was, or at least had been promised to be, lucrative and only minimally hazardous. Jim Pock was of middle weight, medium height, with reddish blonde hair groomed short. Freckles dotted his face and plastered the bridge of his nose, and he looked a young 25, though he was only 22. He wore a solid navy blue jumpsuit with IGF stitched in white on his left breast. On the back, across the shoulder blades, ran POC 762-8, his company number for this departure. POC slipped past the two X-Gen officers checking the coolant runners that bridged the cargo hold with the rest of the system. Next, it was down a small ladder to the underhold, a crawl space that extended the entire length and width of the hold. There were a series of posts that held the grating above his head, and each post was marked in accordance with its position in the hold. He was passing I-8, I-9, then left to H-9, G-9, F-9, and here, under E-9, he found Burke. Burke was looping the anchor straps through their corresponding clamps. Each action was purposeful and concise. "Burke, I'm Jim Pock. I figured I'd come see if you needed a hand." Jim began to extend his hand. This was the first he had seen Burke in person and recognized him from his IGF photo in the docket, and of course from the Burke 883-1 embroidered on the back of his navy blue jumpsuit. But seeing no immediate response from Burke, he recalled his hand and continued, only now in a more professional tone. "The guys up there from HIT say we should be good to go here within the hour. They're just doing the coolant checks now, and of course, they still have the R7T to run diagnostics on real quick, but..." Burke's silence was causing Pock to scramble a bit. "Anyway, like I said, we should be good to go within the hour." "Mm-hmm," Burke absent-mindedly mumbled. Finally, he turned his head from the clamps on post E9. Pock could see that his face was older, maybe 30. It was always hard to tell for Pock if they had spent too much time in zero gravity. Guessing someone's age was near impossible. But Pock could see that Burke had some grays peppering his beard, and the hair on his brow had begun pulling back in the corners. "Yeah, those bastards are going to take longer than an hour, if they're just now doing the coolant runners. It's Damien. Only company cunts call me Burke." "Good to meet you," Pock said, more enthusiastically than he had wanted to sound. His voice always jumped an octave when he was enthusiastic. It often made him sound even younger. You need a hand back here?" Pock could hear the cargo above them being rolled over the grating with a metallic bang. Then silence for a moment as they found their spot. Then came the unmistakable hydraulic hiss. "Nah, I got this. Company wants me to use straps instead of the thermite seals. Must be vaporous or something. Anyway, I got it. Like 6 more straps left at this point." The straps were an alternative to using the thermite reaction to temporarily bond the cargo to the grating. The thermite reaction was always more effective and efficient than ties, but if the cargo was pressure sealed or if they were transporting gases or liquids, the straps were requested. The thermite always ran the chance of splattering and burning right through the seals or cargo container's hull, rendering the integrity of the container moot, which was problematic if they were transporting a hazardous chemical or otherwise harmful agent. "See you up top." Damien had returned to his work and was now moving to the straps dangling from post E8. "Yeah, I'm going to run by the reactor and see how it's coming." Pock's neck was starting to hurt from being hunched over in an awkward half-crawl. He turned and now began heading back towards the stairs through the forest of pillars. "It's not," Burke yelled. "If I know X-Gen, they won't be done with pre-flight inspection. But you go knock yourself the fuck out." His voice was honest and good-natured when he said this last part. Pock imagined he was probably chuckling to himself and grinning through that graying, stubbly beard. When Pock reached the top of the cargo stairs, he looked around. In the time he was down there, the remainder of the cargo hold had been filled. The cargo containers were large, approximately 2.5 meters long, and 1.5 meters wide. They stood as tall as Pock's ribcage and were almost perfect rectangle, aside from the beveled edges on the top and tapered tail end. Pock stood for the briefest of moments, looking across the bay, and then turned about face and headed through the bulkhead into the reception bay, which by this point had emptied itself, leaving only a few hit reps with company tablets made from flexible OLED displays. They were checking the emergency Samsung system. The lights went out, and the emergency lights kicked on. The corridor, where Pock now made his way, was lit with orange lights that flashed searing yellow in alternating patterns. By the time he had made it to the ladder to the upper corridor, the lights were back on, and he could hear voices of the remaining technicians spewing over the mechanical sound of air systems cutting on and anti-frosters booting up. The intercom crackled. Pock 762-8 and Burke 883-1. Make your way to the bridge now for syncing procedure. The sync would allow the onboard Samsung system to calibrate to the two engineers. The process measured a person's personality through tallying idiosyncrasies, compulsions, and pattern projection, as well as a few personality and IQ tests so that, in the end, a profile was created and synced with the onboard AI so that mental as well as physical health was always being monitored. It had been explained at length to Pock during orientation, and most of the information had evaporated into the air, leaving only the residue and big points of the presentation for Pock to commit to memory. When Pock got to the bridge, the blonde hit rep he had seen talking in the reception bay stood and approached him with a crown of electrodes and placed it on his head. While she recited the rules and regulations that he was expected to follow and uphold while under contract from HIT, the recitation was lackluster and unabridged. First, as a representative of Human Interstellar Technologies, allow me to congratulate you on accepting this lucrative contract from our innovative company. As a reminder, in the event of a breach in contract, omission of any rules or regulations under Article 4, Section 8 of the Interstellar Resource Code, we are permitted and encouraged to liquidate all payments and benefits. We understand that space travel can be lonely, and as a prerequisite, and in order to hedge off any foreseeable issues in delivery of goods, you are to complete and must pass a 12-point psych evaluation, as well as a weekly evaluation for the duration of your waking period. The woman now stood in front of Pock and placed 2 electrodes on his forehead and the monitor on his carotid artery. I need you to lift your shirt now, she noted as she turned to the table behind her to grab some sort of harness. Pock unzipped his jumpsuit zipper and pulled the torso portion down to his waist. Then pulled off his white undershirt, which caught on one of the electrodes. The hit rep turned and helped him with his crown and reattached the electrode that now dangled in front of Pock's left eye. She knelt, and he could smell her breath as she leaned in to make sure the wires remained intact and connected to their anchor points. It smelled of stale coffee and something sweet, like berries and cream. Okay, Jim, she began. She sounded much better saying this than the heavy-set rep who had tried the same trick earlier. I am going to turn on the scanner, then we will begin the test. It should only take about 10 minutes or so, and we'll move through 3 phases. The first phase is a cognitive response phase. The second is a prefrontal differentiation phase. And finally, we will review behavioral tendencies. Do you understand? Her voice was soothing, not sexy or sweet, but calming. She had a practiced candor that came across as genuine and authentic. The sound of the words she spoke sent little shivers up his spine that hit the base of his skull and spread like warm water in a cool bath across his scalp. Yeah, I get it, he managed. Good. So we can begin. If you should at any moment feel uneasy or uncomfortable, please just let me know. I will pause the procedure and we can take a moment to recuperate. As she said this, she placed a delicate hand on his bare shoulder, and he could feel her sharp, polished nails tapping lightly on his skin. Her hand felt cold and smooth, and again the smell of cream, partially sweetened, drifted in the air. After the procedure, Sam here will extrapolate and assign a score. Pac hated that, when people talked about the AI as though it was a person. But as much as he hated it, her cool, gentle hand calmed the irritant. The score will reflect your aptitude and defunct tendencies, if you have any, she added, letting us know any risks before they become a problem. And of course, allowing Sam to custom tailor your workload and order of ops to best fit your personal little eccentricities. As she finished this last line, she investigated his face for recognition. Pac offered a nod of assertion that he understood and was compliant. But his thoughts remained fixated on the tender hand that remained resting on his shoulder. No sooner had his thoughts acknowledged this tenderness, the bulkhead behind him opened, and she withdrew her hand. Damien, I will be with you in just a moment. Just have a seat right there. She motioned next to Pac, and take off your shirt for me. Burke was a bit winded. Most likely the straps took longer than anticipated, and he had to rush down the corridor, up the ladder, back down the second corridor, and had just now reached the bridge after his short sprint. Jim? The blonde hit rep pulled him from his speculations. He saw she was extending a wristband with a tube attached to it. Sorry. Pac threw his hand forward eagerly. You will notice some side effects after the procedure. You should feel very tired. It is a brain overhaul after all. She chuckled, and then again returned her voice to the calming professional tone. That is just to be expected, and nothing to be alarmed over. Make sure to rehydrate and get some sleep after your initial departure. Who has first shift? Well, we're both up till way station 1, and then he goes night-night for the next 6 months and takes second shift, Burke blurted out while he readjusted, his shirt already off and haphazardly tossed over the table in front of him, where his crown and monitor now sat. So he should be nice and rested. The hit rep looked back over her shoulder, then back at Pac. Well, that's nice. You get first nap. Just make sure you get the mandatory 6 hours over the next day. By this, she meant Galactic Day, which consisted of 36 hours, broken into 10 hours of work, 2 hours of sleep, 10 hours of work, 2 hours of sleep, a final 8 hours of work, 2 hours of hygiene therapy, and a final 2 hours of sleep. All right, Mr. Pac. Seemed so formal now, and all of the feeling of infatuation dissolved before his very senses. You are all set. Again, it should only take about 10 to 15 minutes. Then you should be ready for your departure. With that, she handed Pac a cup of water, which he downed quickly and handed back to her. Then, turning to Burke. Okay, Damien, first, as a representative of Human Interstellar Technologies, allow me to congratulate you on accepting this lucrative contract from our innovative company.